Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to the cobbled streets of Melbourne in the late 19th century, a place where horse hooves clack gently against stone. Gas lamps flicker in the twilight, and lace-curtained windows conceal secrets best left unspoken. You're wandering through the cool dusk past ivy-covered fences and tidy rows of terraced cottages. Somewhere nearby, a kettle hums softly on the stove, and a woman stirs sugar into tea. Seems harmless enough, right? Except the woman is Martha Needle, and that teacup, yeah, you probably won't survive it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way down a narrow laneway, less a street, more a suggestion where laundry flaps lazily above your head, and the air smells faintly of eucalyptus and coal smoke. This is Melbourne, 1891, a booming city with gold rush bones and a polite colonial crust that tries very hard not to crack. But beneath the bustling storefronts and corseted tea parties, something darker simmers. It always does. You pass a woman on the steps of a modest cottage. She's in her 30s, neatly dressed, arms folded as she watches the street. Her name is Martha Needle. Most folks know her as kind, quiet, maybe a bit odd, but grief will do that, they say. She's known grief, and she's known how to make it look like an accident. She's lived here for a few years now, part of a working-class neighbourhood, just far enough from central Melbourne to avoid the attention of the fashionable set. Her garden is well tended, her children well behaved. People trust Martha, maybe a little too easily. But if you squint, if you slow your pace just enough, you might notice something off. The way she smiles, but never quite reaches her eyes. The way she stares too long at the chemist's window, or how she avoids the butcher's shop altogether. Historians still argue whether Martha's story should be seen through the lens of madness, trauma, or just cold calculation. But what's clear is that it all begins here in a seemingly ordinary Melbourne street, where tea was poured with a generous hand, and just a pinch of something extra. The 1890s in Melbourne were a curious mix of optimism and anxiety. The gold rush had brought money immigration and big dreams, but also inequality, depression, and rising crime. Still, people clung to order, to the idea that women like Martha Needle, widowed and refined, were the moral backbone of society. She knew this. She played the part well. And then one day the funerals started. Martha's husband, Henry Needle, had been a labourer. Not wealthy, not poor, hard-working. He'd reportedly complained of stomach pains and fatigue, but chalked it up to the stress of long days. He died in 1891. It was sudden, tragic. But these things happen, right? You can almost hear the neighbours murmuring after the funeral. Poor Martha. So strong, so calm. She wore black for weeks, moved quietly through the house. Her 3 daughters clung to her skirts. People brought casseroles and offers of help. No one questioned the death too deeply. But you're starting to, aren't you? In hindsight, it feels like the opening move of a long and patient game. And Martha, she's a master of patience. Let's zoom out for a second. Poisoning in the 19th century wasn't exactly rare. In fact, arsenic, Martha's alleged weapon of choice, was distressingly common. It was used in rat poison fly papers and even beauty products. Victorian women literally smeared it on their faces to get that ghostly white complexion. Radiant and radioactive. You love to see it. But arsenic was also tasteless, odorless, and mimicked natural illness with uncanny ease. A stomachache, vomiting, fatigue. You'd be lucky if the local doctor even raised an eyebrow, especially if you were a grieving widow with big wet eyes and a softly folded handkerchief. Martha understood all this. She didn't have to be flashy, just consistent, just patient. And Melbourne let her be. That's the part that lingers, isn't it? The eerie quietness of it all. No screaming, no violence. Just a woman, a kettle, and a calm determination that would leave 5 graves in her wake before anyone dared to question the pattern. Now imagine the street again, the one you walked down earlier. Imagine it getting quieter house by house, life by life, as Martha Needle brews another cup of tea. You walk a little further down the timeline, now stepping out of those cobbled streets and into something much earlier, much rougher. Before the dark tea rituals, before the polite mourning dresses, before anyone ever called her Mrs. Needle, you're in South Australia, in the dusty cradle of Martha Charles's childhood. The year is 1863, and the world feels vast, dry, and unforgiving. She's born into it like a whisper, one of 8 children in a home where whispers don't last long. There's too much shouting, too many slammed doors, too much silence in between. Historians still argue whether Martha's descent began here in a childhood marked by violence and instability. What's less debated is this: her family was troubled. Her father, William Charles, was known for his temper. Her mother, overworked, overwhelmed, struggled to keep peace among the chaos. You can imagine little Martha, small and sharp-eyed, learning early that stillness is safer than crying. That smiling when timed right might buy her a few more minutes of peace. When she was about 9, the family moved again. Economic hardship chasing them like a shadow across the Australian countryside. At some point, her younger sister died. We don't know how. The record doesn't tell us. But it's there, one more loss, one more grave pressed into young Martha's memory. They say children raised in chaos often learn to hide in plain sight. Martha didn't shout for attention. She learned to observe, to adapt, to survive. Later, when she was a teenager, her mother died, and that's when things got even harder. The Charles children scattered like leaves in a storm. One sibling institutionalized, another vanished from the records entirely. Martha was passed from relative to relative, each home another temporary stop. Each goodbye a little colder than the last. No roots, no place to soften. And then came Henry Needle. He was stable, employed, decent by all accounts. Martha married him in her early 20s. A new name, a new start. She wore lace and tried to be gentle, and for a little while it seemed like she might outrun her childhood. They settled in Adelaide first, where Henry worked steadily, and the couple welcomed 3 daughters, Mabel, Elsie, and May. You picture their home modest but tidy, the air filled with laundry steam and bedtime songs. A woman rebuilding, reimagining herself. But of course, the past doesn't stay buried just because you change your last name. Weird things began happening. Strange illnesses, chronic fatigue, rumors. One relative later recalled that Martha had once watched a sickly dog die with a strange, almost peaceful smile. Another said she'd always had a morbid interest in death. You don't want to read too much into these recollections. They came long after the crimes tainted by hindsight. But still, they linger like a draft in an old house. By 1885, the family moved again, this time to Melbourne. A fresh chapter. Or maybe the beginning of the final act. Henry was often sick. The children too, on and off. Doctors chalked it up to influenza, bad food, working-class air. And Martha. She nursed them gently, always with a cup of something warm in her hand. You can imagine her standing at the stove, steam curling into her curls, murmuring sweet reassurances even as her husband's body slowly gave out beneath her care. They say Henry grew paranoid in his final days. Whispers of suspicion, little gasps of fear. But what could he say? What would people believe his wife was grieving? Always grieving. And then he was gone. One newspaper described her mourning outfit as meticulous, as if even her sorrow had an aesthetic. She stayed in Melbourne, kept the house, tried to raise the girls on her own, but poverty nipped at her heels. She sold trinkets. She worked odd jobs. She still smiled at neighbours, still served tea. But something had shifted. The Martha Charles who'd clawed her way through childhood had re-emerged beneath the veil. And this time she wasn't hiding. She was sharpening. And here's your quirky fact around this time. arsenic became even more accessible thanks to a popular product called Rough on Rats. Cute name, not so cute consequences. You could buy it over the counter, no questions asked, and it came in a cheery little red box. Housewives used it often. No one batted an eye. Imagine something designed to kill pests sitting right next to your ginger biscuits on the pantry shelf. It was legal. It was deadly. And in the hands of someone like Martha, someone who'd learned that pain could be disguised as care, it was the perfect instrument. Some argue Martha never intended to become a killer, that she snapped under pressure, that grief warped her into something unrecognizable. But the timeline, if you follow it closely, suggests otherwise, because as you'll see in the next chapter, Henry wouldn't be the last. He was just the practice run. You linger just a little longer outside that quiet Melbourne cottage. The shutters are drawn, and a cat slinks past your feet, tail flicking like it knows something you don't. Inside, the air is warm with steam from the kettle and the slightly bitter scent of boiled cabbage. This is the respectable home of Mrs. Martha Needle. Widow, mother, meticulous housekeeper, dangerously underestimated. By now, Henry has been buried. A modest affair. Small crowd. A few polite nods and lowered eyes. The neighborhood watches Martha closely, not out of suspicion, but sympathy. She's had such hard luck, poor dear, and the way she carries on head high, smile faint but ever present, well, it's downright inspiring. It's 1892 now, and Martha's reinvention as the respectable Mrs. Needle is in full swing. She makes sure the garden stays lovely, keeps the windows clean, the porch swept. You know the type, the sort of woman who trims the edges of sandwiches and arranges the table just so. People say her hands never stop moving, cooking, scrubbing, folding. But beneath that motion, something still simmers. The girls, Mabel, Elsie, and May, are her world now, or at least that's what she says. She walks them to school, braids their hair, keeps a watchful eye over every sniffle, every skipped meal. But then, it starts again. First, it's little May, the youngest. She's just 4 when the fever comes, complains of belly aches, sleeps too much. You can picture Martha watching her closely, lips pressed together as she stirs another spoonful of medicine into the tea. The doctor says it's gastroenteritis. Common, harmless, probably something she ate. But it isn't harmless. May dies not long after. Pale, listless eyes too big for her little face. Another funeral, another tiny grave, and Martha stoic, heartbroken, but not shocked. She wears black again, but not for long. The neighbors whisper, "How can someone lose so much and still look so polished?" Historians still argue whether this was the point of no return. Did Martha see death as mercy, as a solution? Or did she simply learn that it worked, that people died and no one asked too many questions? Not long after May's death, Mabel, the eldest, falls ill. She's 9. Stronger, smarter. She tells the teacher she doesn't feel right after her tea. Her eyes itch. Her stomach burns. But she goes home anyway. You can almost hear the kettle whistling again. Within weeks, Mabel is gone. Another accident. Another tragic, unexplained illness. Elsie, the middle child, starts to act strange, withdrawn, quiet. Maybe she senses something. Or maybe she just knows the pattern. Because by now, it is a pattern. You're watching it unfold slow and methodical, like a metronome ticking toward the inevitable. And then Elsie dies too. 3 children, 3 caskets, all in the space of just a few years. By this point, you'd think anyone might notice the trail of death behind Martha's slippers. But this was Victorian Australia. People respected privacy. They feared scandal more than they feared the truth. And they trusted appearances. Martha looked the part of a grieving mother. That was enough. Here's something darkly amusing if your sense of humor's twisted just right. Arsenic wasn't just used for killing rats. It was also in wallpaper. Literally. People in the 1800s were dying because their bedrooms were decorated in deadly green dyes. Paris green, they called it. Sounded fancy, Smelled nice, slowly poisoned you in your sleep. Delightful, really. And while most people didn't connect the dots between wallpaper and sickness, imagine what a clever woman like Martha could have done with that knowledge. She didn't need to strangle or stab. No drama, no noise, just a teaspoon, a smile, a quiet goodbye. She moved to another neighborhood for a while, lived with a friend. People say she was good company, always helpful. She'd bring tea to sick visitors, comfort them, then go back to her knitting. No one suspected a thing. What makes this even eerier is the timeline, the precision. Each death spaced just far enough apart not to raise alarms, each illness just believable enough. She walked the razor's edge with grace, hiding monstrosity beneath manners. If this were fiction, you'd say it's too neat, too deliberate. But real life is messy in a different way, quiet, cruel, and often unnoticed. By now, the grief is layered so deep around Martha it's become armor. People stop asking questions. What's the point? The answers are always the same. She did her best. Children are so fragile. God must have wanted them. You'd think grief would break her, that she'd collapse in the face of so much death. But not Martha. She seems fine, composed, almost relieved. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because after all that death, you'd expect her to pull inward, to disappear. But no, Martha falls in love. So after 3 tiny funerals and years wrapped in mourning lace, what does Martha Needle do? She buys a nicer kettle. She straightens her spine, and she says yes to romance. Enter Otto. Otto George, a German-born engineer, thoughtful, steady, and just a little too trusting. He meets Martha through her landlord, who also happens to be his brother. The connection is innocent enough at first. She's a lodger, quiet and polite. He's an engineer with neat hands and a talent for fixing things. Not exactly sparks flying, more like a low, slow burn of familiarity. But it grows. You imagine their first conversation takes place over tea. Of course it does. He compliments her cooking. She compliments his shirt. He doesn't ask about the black and white photographs on her dresser. 3 little girls unsmiling. She doesn't offer. Soon they're walking together in the park. She's charming in that measured, gentle way, never too loud, never too eager. Otto finds her soothing. And perhaps after the turbulent grief and chaos of the past, that's exactly what Martha wants to be, a safe harbor. They become engaged, quietly, without much fanfare. But the Needle House has come alive again. Martha bakes more, smiles more. There's color in her cheeks, maybe even hope in her step. But if you're getting comfortable, don't, because Otto's family starts feeling odd. It's his brother first, the landlord. He complains of nausea, headaches, a slow, curling fatigue that settles in the bones. He shrugs it off. A cold, maybe, or indigestion. But it drags on. Weeks, then months. And strangely, Otto himself begins feeling it too. You know what's coming. You want to shake them through the pages of history. Don't drink the tea, but they do. And one night, Otto's father comes to dinner. A lovely roast, soft bread, warm custard for dessert. And, of course, Martha's signature, a perfectly steeped, just sweet enough cup of tea. The old man doesn't make it through the week. His decline is rapid, painful, astringent. And Otto begins to connect the dots, not the way a detective would, but the way a man in denial does. Slowly, hesitantly, with a sick feeling blooming in the gut. Historians still argue whether Otto suspected her outright, or whether he simply couldn't believe the alternative. He did love her after all. He trusted her. That trust had teeth. But someone finally raises an alarm. A local doctor, perhaps, or a chemist. The exact detail is murky. But what matters is that suspicion takes root. And here's the quirky side note for you around this time: forensic science is starting to grow up. In the late 19th century, toxicology was moving from guesswork to something a bit more scientific. Arsenic could be detected with a process called the Marsh test, named after chemist James Marsh, who wanted a better way to prove poison in court. Before that, well, You could be absolutely riddled with arsenic and buried with a clean bill of health. But now they had ways to see the unseen. So a teacup gets tested, just a single sip left behind. A trace. Barely a ghost of a liquid. But it speaks volumes. The results come back and they're chilling. Enough arsenic to make a small man collapse. Enough to make a pattern suddenly impossible to ignore. Otto's father. Otto's brother. Otto himself. It's no longer just about coincidence or bad luck or one woman's long trail of grief. It's about murder. Systematic. Precise. Repeated. And that's when Martha makes her one big mistake. She doesn't run. She stays. Keeps her routine. Polishes the silver. Smiles at the neighbors. As if the storm isn't bearing down on her doorstep. As if the teacups in her cupboard aren't tiny loaded weapons waiting to be read. She underestimates Otto. Maybe she thinks he'll protect her. Maybe she hopes he's too far in to back out. But he's not. The moment the test results come back, everything begins to unravel. There's a quiet knock at the door. 2 uniformed men, a doctor with a folder under his arm. She answers calmly. Offers them tea. They decline. She's arrested on the spot. Calmly, without a fight. Just like everything else she's done, slowly, precisely, without ceremony. And just like that, the curtain falls on the respectable Mrs. Needle. You can almost hear the neighbor across the street drop her teacup in shock, because no one saw it coming. You watch her now, Martha Needle, being led away down the stone steps of her home. There's no fuss, no shouting, just the soft click of boots on pavement and the rustle of her skirts as they brush against the rails. A few neighbors peek from behind curtains. One woman clutches her pearls. Another mutters that it must be a mistake. Martha arrested, impossible. But it isn't. She's escorted to the police station. The constable offers her a seat. She takes it with grace, folding her hands in her lap as though she's waiting for her tea to be served. Not a word of protest. Not a single tear. If she's frightened, she hides it better than most. The charge is murder. Specifically the murder of Otto's brother and father. But whispers are already swirling that there might be more, much more. The teacup is entered into evidence. It's the quiet star of the investigation, delicate floral, the kind of thing you'd expect to see on your grandmother's sideboard. And yet it contains the proof. Arsenic in measurable amounts. Traces not only in the remaining liquid, but in the inner glaze. Repeated exposure. See, that's what gives it away. A telltale fingerprint left behind in porcelain. Historians still argue whether Martha kept using the same cup by habit or confidence. Did she not expect science to catch up to her? Or did she simply think no one would dare test the remains of something as genteel as tea? It's now that her past becomes interesting to investigators. They dig into her history, names and addresses, death certificates, and with each name comes the same pattern. Sudden illness, vague symptoms, and the ever-present Martha. The authorities quietly exhume the bodies of her 3 daughters, Mabel, Elsie, May. A grim ritual. Dirt, coffins, silence. Tests confirm it. All 3 show signs of arsenic poisoning. The tea wasn't just for Otto's family, and Henry, her husband, he's exhumed too. Same findings. Arsenic. Enough to bring down a horse, or a man already worn thin by a hard life and a harder wife. Now the press gets involved. Oh, and they love this story. The Black Widow of Melbourne, they call her. The teacup murderess. Headlines curl off the printing presses like gossip set on fire. Her face, pale composed, is sketched and reprinted 100 times. Everyone has an opinion. Was she mad? Was she evil? Was she just tired? That last one is floated in a particularly soft-hearted editorial in which the writer suggests maybe Martha was simply overwhelmed. Grief-stricken. Broken by motherhood. It's nonsense, of course, but this is 1890s journalism. Part morality play, part melodrama, part afternoon entertainment. You want the quirky fact of the day. In Victorian-era Australia, juries were all male. All of them. 12 serious mustachioed men in stiff suits deciding whether a woman like Martha Needle should swing. That's the system. Fair, maybe not, but consistent at least. And Martha, she watches it unfold with remarkable serenity. During her early hearings, she's calm. Eerily so. She answers questions plainly, offers nothing more than necessary. One official records that she displayed no signs of distress nor remorse. She doesn't deny the deaths. Not exactly, but she doesn't confess either. It's like she's watching the whole thing happen to someone else. One witness claims she once said, "Death brings peace." Another remembers her telling a nurse that sometimes pain is a kindness. Creepy, sure, but not entirely incoherent either. She'd lived a hard life, buried a lot of people. Maybe she believed what she said. Still, the evidence is stacking up like teacups in a sink. The arsenic, the teacup, the repeated pattern, and behind it all the gentle figure of Martha Needle, quiet as snowfall. There's a moment brief nearly missed when she allegedly smiles as one of the charges is read aloud. It's not a big grin, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it stays with the constable who saw it. He writes about it years later. Said it chilled him. Historians still debate what that smile meant. Was it defiance, relief, or just a reflex, like someone realizing the game is finally over? She's remanded in custody, sent to the Melbourne jail, a grey, grim place. High walls, narrow beds, a place where time thickens like cold porridge. There she waits, and Melbourne, proper bustling, tea-loving Melbourne, waits with her. The respectable Mrs. Needle has become the city's favourite nightmare. You follow her now through the iron gates of the Melbourne jail. Not in a carriage, not in a dress that rustles proudly down the street. This time she's wearing prison grey, though neat and pressed, of course. You wouldn't expect less from Martha Needle. Inside the jail, the air is heavy. Cold stones sweat in the winter, and in summer the heat thickens like soup. The ceilings are high, but somehow everything feels closer. Closer than you'd like. The cells are narrow, the light mean and stingy. Martha is led down the corridor past the cells of women who don't speak much but always watch. One matron later says Martha seemed perfectly at ease, as if she'd merely changed houses, not been locked away awaiting trial for the deaths of her entire family and her almost in-laws. Historians still argue whether this composure came from shock detachment or something far more unnerving, a total lack of conscience. But again, that's the rub with Martha. You can never be sure whether she's processing grief or polishing it like silverware. Her trial is announced. The city buzzes like someone stirred sugar into the whole population. It's the biggest criminal case Melbourne has seen in years. You can barely find a seat in the courtroom. Ladies faint. Reporters scratch shorthand like their pencils might catch fire. And in the middle of it all sits Martha, small, pale, gloved. She doesn't blink much. Now here's the uncomfortable detail. The evidence presented is damning but subtle. There's no smoking gun, no dramatic confession. Just a teacup, a little arsenic, a tidy sequence of deaths, and the quiet suggestion that none of it was natural. One doctor testifies that the symptoms experienced by each of the deceased are entirely consistent with arsenic poisoning, abdominal pain, vomiting, gradual wasting away. Another adds that small doses over time can mimic chronic illness, especially in children. In other words, you could poison someone for weeks without drawing attention. Like erosion. Slow. Relentless. That's how Martha did it. And let's not forget, arsenic was everywhere. In flypapers, in dyes, in tonics, even in some makeup. The line between accident and intention was blurrier than your vision after 3 sleepless nights. That's what makes this case so chilling. She used the most ordinary thing in the world. A cup of tea. You're sitting in the courtroom now in the back row. The benches are hard. The ceiling fans creak. And you can hear the soft scratch of a quill recording every word as the prosecution lays it all out. Henry Needle deceased. Arsenic detected. No prior illness. May Mabel and Elsie Needle all dead within 2 years. Same pattern, same symptoms. Otto's father sudden death. Teacup tested. Arsenic confirmed. Otto and his brother both ill, both recovering because they stopped drinking the tea in time. The defense, meanwhile, tries a softer approach. They paint Martha as a grieving mother, a woman shattered by life, someone who simply had too much pain and too little help. They hint subtly, of course, that she might have mental health issues, maybe a sort of female hysteria, as it was clumsily labeled at the time, maybe even religious delusions. One witness claims she muttered prayers while stirring sugar, but the prosecution doesn't need drama. They just need the teacup. That porcelain cup becomes the centerpiece of the trial. The forensic chemist holds it up like a sacred relic, explains how traces of arsenic were absorbed into the glaze proof of repeated contamination. Not once, not twice, many times. And here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Arsenic doesn't degrade with time. Even today, scientists can detect it in bodies buried more than a century ago. Which means technically the ghosts in Martha's story can still whisper. The jury listens. Stiff collars, pursed lips, 12 men trying to decide if kindness could ever be this cold. And here's the part that'll stick with you. Martha doesn't cry, doesn't beg, doesn't scream her innocence. She sits there like a schoolteacher waiting for the bell. One reporter writes that she looked mild, even sweet through most of the proceedings. Only once did she speak up when asked if she had anything to say. She simply said, "I have done no wrong. I loved them all." That's it. Historians still puzzle over that sentence. Was it a lie, a half-truth, or did she genuinely believe it, that love and death could live side by side like sugar and poison in the same cup? The jury deliberates. Not long. A few hours. The courtroom hushes as they file back in. Guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. She nods once, just once. No weeping, no dramatics, just a quiet acceptance. Like she always knew this was how the story ended. You hear the murmurs ripple through the crowd. Some gasp, some clap. One woman faints. But Martha just folds her hands in her lap. Tea time's over. You walk beside her now, deeper into the stone belly of the jail, to the women's wing. The air is even colder here. It smells faintly of soap, old linen, and something sharper underneath, iron perhaps, or mildew in the cracks of the stone. The walls listen. Everything here listens. Martha Needle has been condemned. The guards, mostly women, don't quite know what to make of her. She's polite, soft-spoken, always thanks them, always folds her blanket just so. You might expect rage, or sobbing, or hysteria. But no. Martha asks for more reading paper. She embroiders. She hums sometimes. One matron says it's a hymn. Another says it's a lullaby. And sometimes when the jail falls into that eerie half-silence before dawn, they swear she talks to her daughters. Out loud. Not in a ghostly eyes-rolled-back way, but like they're just in the next room. Like she's asking them what they want for breakfast. Historians still argue whether Martha truly believed they were with her in those final days, or if it was part performance, part defiance. Either way, she becomes unsettlingly calm, unshaken, steady. There's an official record that a chaplain visited her regularly, tried to coax a confession. Gently, of course. He was more shepherd than interrogator. But Martha never admitted guilt, never once said she did it. All she ever said was that she loved them too much to let them suffer. It's the kind of sentence that lands like a thud in the soul. Now here's your odd fact for the night. Victorian prisons had something called a death mask, a plaster cast of the face taken after execution. Not for punishment, but for science. For phrenology, mostly a now debunked pseudoscience that believed you could read criminal tendencies from the shape of a skull. Martha's mask was made too. Somewhere stored in a dusty collection, her expression remains silent, wide-eyed, unmoved. But back to the prison. There are whispers in the wing. The other inmates stay quiet when she passes. Not out of fear. There's something else. Respect, awe. Even the most hardened women understand she's different. Not in her crimes, necessarily, but in her serenity. She writes letters during this time, mostly to Otto. Yes, Otto. He survived, remember, barely. He stopped drinking the tea just in time. and now he's out there alive watching her face appear in every newspaper. The man who nearly died becomes the man who watched the woman he loved become Australia's most notorious female killer. Martha's letters to him are strange. She insists on her innocence, of course, but she also reminisces gently. She recalls walks in the park, picnics with jam. One letter ends with, "You were the kindest man I ever knew. I hope you still drink tea just more carefully." That's chilling, right? The way she signs it, too. Not with love, just her full name. Martha Needle. The guards talk about her late at night. One of them tells her she's too quiet for the gallows. Martha smiles at that. Says, "Quiet is how I came into the world. Quiet is how I'll leave it." It's during this time that the public starts to shift. The initial horror begins to dull around the edges, and curiosity takes over. The press runs stories not just about her crimes, but her poise. They debate whether she's a monster or a martyr. They wonder how a mother could kill her children and still sleep at night. One editorial calls her the embodiment of the angel of death dressed in calico. Another describes her as a riddle that walks upright. And here's a detail you might like: the last thing she requested in prison wasn't food or flowers or even forgiveness. It was a teacup. They didn't give it to her. The day before her execution, she asked for a mirror, just to check her hair. Not vanity, she said, just something to do with her hands. She still braided it the same way she did when she was married. A little loop behind each ear. Precise. Elegant. They say she slept well the night before. No restlessness. No pacing. Just lay down, eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been prayer or memory. No one could tell the difference. The morning sun rose slow and sticky behind the walls of the jail, and Martha waited for it. It's just after dawn now. You're standing in the exercise yard of Melbourne Gaol. The sky is washed-out blue, streaked with pale grey clouds that haven't yet decided whether they'll rain. The air smells like damp stone and wood smoke drifting from faraway chimneys. Birds are chirping faintly somewhere beyond the prison walls. But inside, everything is silent. This is execution day. A soft knock on the cell door. A matron enters, head bowed. Martha is already awake. She's dressed neatly, of course. A dark gown modestly buttoned to the collar. Her hands are folded in her lap, and she's been staring at the same crack in the wall for hours. Maybe minutes. Time runs differently on your last day. "You may have your tea now," the matron says, and even she flinches at the phrase. Martha declines. The hangman arrives around 7. A civil servant of sorts. This is just another task, another box to tick. He doesn't speak to her. No one does, really. Words feel like glass today, fragile, sharp, and prone to break under the wrong pressure. And yet Martha says thank you. Thank you to the matron. Thank you to the guard who brings her a shawl. She doesn't tremble. She doesn't weep. She simply rises and walks the length of the corridor as if she's heading to a garden party. Historians still argue whether this calm was real, whether she truly felt nothing, or whether she was just that good at pretending. One theory whispered among the prison staff for years after was that Martha thought she'd earned this ending, that it wasn't punishment, it was release. By the time she reaches the scaffold, the prison yard has hushed into reverence. Executions weren't public by this point, but word always got around. A few officials. One reporter. 2 clergymen. No family. Otto isn't there. Her final moments are brief. She looks upward, perhaps, toward the sky, perhaps toward nothing at all, and says, "I am innocent. May God know my heart." That's it. No final flourish, no scream, not even a tear. The hood is placed over her head, the noose adjusted, and the lever pulled. They say her body barely twitched, that her feet stilled almost immediately. The crowd stood for a moment longer than necessary, as though expecting an encore, but there wasn't one. A doctor stepped forward, checked her pulse, nodded once. It was over. Martha Needle, aged 31, mother of 3, was declared dead just minutes after sunrise. She was buried in an unmarked grave within the jail grounds, standard for executed criminals. No ceremony, no headstone, just earth. And yet her story didn't rest there. Here's your unsettling detail for the night her death mask was created that same morning. A mixture of plaster and wax poured over her lifeless face, capturing every curve, every crease, every whisper of who she had been. It now rests in a glass case at a museum, watched by schoolchildren and tourists who rarely grasp the full weight of the woman it once mirrored. And the teacup still exists, stored away, catalogued and sealed, no longer evidence in a trial, but a relic of a very particular kind of evil. The quiet, domestic, polite kind. The kind that smiles as it stirs in the sugar. It's the kind of story that sticks with a city. Melbourne tried to forget her. The jail itself eventually shut down. The neighborhood around it changed. But the legend of Martha Needle remains, passed along like a ghost story over fence posts and dinner tables. Sometimes you'll hear people say, "She just snapped." Others swear she was a cold-blooded killer from the start. Some even claim she wasn't guilty at all. Historians still debate the psychological nuance of her case. Was she mentally ill or monstrously sane? Was she a product of her time, pressed under the weight of motherhood and widowhood in a society that offered her no escape? Or did she simply enjoy the control? No one agrees, but everyone remembers the teacup. Because here's the strange truth about Martha's story. It's not the arsenic that haunts you. It's the ritual. The clinking of a spoon, the steam rising from porcelain, the gentle smile of a woman offering comfort. You sip, you trust, and by the time your stomach turns, it's far too late. You wander through the aftermath now, not of an explosion, but of something far more lingering. The dust settles differently when the violence was slow domestic and brewed in bone china. The trial is over. The scaffold's been dismantled. The newspapers have moved on mostly. New crimes, new scandals. But in quiet corners of Melbourne, the name Martha Needle still curls on lips like steam from a too-hot cup. And yet for all the headlines and horrified gasps, justice didn't bring much closure. Otto George, the man who nearly married her, disappears from public life. He doesn't speak to reporters. He never writes a memoir. Not a letter survives. He simply fades. A ghost who walked away just in time. Some say he left Melbourne entirely. Others think he lived nearby anonymously, his life reduced to whispers and what-ifs. And can you blame him? Imagine loving someone so deeply you planned a future together, and then discovering your father and brother died by her hand, and that you were next. Some stories don't get neat epilogues. Others fester in family trees. That's what happened with the Needle case. Rumors trickled down through generations. Children grew up hearing Martha's name in hushed warnings. Don't accept tea from strangers. Don't trust a quiet woman. Some smiles are dangerous. And here's a deliciously strange tidbit. A few years after Martha's death, a spiritualist claimed to have contacted her during a séance. Said she appeared in a black dress and offered everyone tea. The medium refused it, of course. But the story spread like a bedtime tale. Martha Needle serving ghostly poison at the edge of the spirit world. Even in death, her legend was steeped in ritual. Historians still argue about legacy, about why her case out of so many remains lodged in the Australian psyche. Because let's face it, Martha wasn't the only poisoner in history. There were others before her. Many. Arsenic was practically the poison of choice for 19th century domestic murderers. Women especially. Why? Because it was accessible, and subtle, and perhaps most disturbingly tidy. No blood, no screams, no shattered glass. Just sickness, sympathy, then silence. And yet Martha's case lingers more stubbornly than most. Maybe it's because she killed her children. Or maybe it's because she looked so normal doing it, not wild-eyed or raging, just calm, sweet-faced. A woman you'd ask for directions, a woman you'd trust to mind your kids while you went shopping. It's that contrast, the surface charm and the buried horror, that gets under the skin. In the years after her execution, books were written, stage plays performed. In one lurid adaptation, she was cast as a sort of Lady Macbeth figure, driven mad by grief. In another, she was a femme fatale, seducing and slaughtering without conscience. Neither version felt quite right, because the real Martha Needle was quieter, stranger, more unsettling than fiction ever quite captured. The building where she lived was eventually torn down, the street renamed. But for decades afterward, the garden plot where her flowers once bloomed was said to grow a little too well. Must be the soil, old women muttered, exchanging glances. You pass it now, a modern streetcars parked where carriages once rolled. The sunlight falls across a row of identical fences. But somewhere beneath it all, the bones of the old house still sleep. The ground remembers. It always does. And then there's that teacup again, preserved, cleaned, archived. Not on display, you can't just walk into a museum and ask to see it, but it exists. Somewhere in the underbelly of legal history. Evidence, yes, but also something stranger, a symbol. Of what? That's the real question, isn't it? Is it a symbol of feminine rage, of invisible pain, of manipulation wrapped in sugar cubes? Historians still debate. Meanwhile, you sip your own tea, now hopefully arsenic-free, and wonder what it was like to live in that house, to be her neighbor, to be her child, to be her. Did she feel guilt? Did she dream of the girls she buried? Or was it all just silence behind her eyes? We'll never really know. And maybe that's what keeps the story alive, not just the deaths, but the vacuum at the center of them. The calm, polite, unbearable unknown of Martha Needle. Let's wander back just briefly to the day she was arrested. The image sticks with you, Martha Needle standing in her doorway, polite as ever, as the officers step forward. She doesn't flinch, doesn't slam the door or beg or bargain. She simply tilts her head and asks, "What's this about then?" And when they tell her when the word murder slides into the open air, she does something unexpected. She smiles, not a wicked grin, not even a smile that reaches her eyes, just a small, tired curve of the lips, as if to say, "Finally. So we're doing this now." That moment unnerved the officers. One later said it felt like she'd been expecting them for weeks, and that wasn't far off. You see, by the time Martha was arrested, she was already being watched. Otto had grown suspicious, and though his heart pulled one way, his gut pulled the other. When his own health improved the moment he stopped drinking her tea, he knew, quietly, horribly, he knew. He contacted a chemist, then a doctor, then the police. The chain reaction began. The teacup, yes, that very one, was retrieved from her shelf, nestled among a half-dozen others, floral patterns, all the set of a careful hostess. But that one cup, the one Otto's father used, had a faint crystalline residue, even after washing. A forensic chemist confirmed it arsenic layered and fused into the inner rim of the porcelain. You can't scrub away a secret that's soaked into the glaze. Martha didn't resist arrest. That's part of what made her so chilling, her composure, her stillness. Most killers panic, deny, flee. Martha asked for her shawl, folded it neatly over her arm, and locked the door behind her. And as word of her arrest spread through Melbourne, the public gasped. Not because of the crime, though yes, that too, but because of who had done it. She had volunteered at church. She had baked for neighbors. She had worn pearls at funerals. Respectable women weren't supposed to poison people. Not like this. Historians still argue whether the shock was more about the breach of class and gender norms than the deaths themselves. Because poison in the public imagination belonged to desperate women, yes, but poor ones, uneducated ones, not someone with lace curtains and handwritten labels on her spice rack. And so Martha Needle became news. The press dug through her past like raccoons at a picnic. They printed sketches of her, some accurate, others borderline caricature. One paper described her eyes as soft as cake batter, with a curl of something colder behind them. Another called her a creature of calm calculation. Melodramatic, sure, but people read it. Every column, every courtroom detail. They devoured it between bites of toast, shivering with fascination. One headline in The Age read, "A woman of gentle voice and grave intent." That one stuck. Let's pause here for a curious footnote. During her trial, a small group of local women petitioned for clemency. Not because they believed her innocent, but because they believed her tragic. A victim of circumstance, a woman pushed too far by loss. They argued she wasn't evil, just broken. The petition didn't change her sentence, but it tells you something about how the public viewed her, not as a monster, but as a mystery. And that's the core of Martha's legacy. Not what she did, but the way she did it. No theatrics, no cruelty, just tea. Murder delivered with a saucer and a smile. In those final weeks before her execution, there were visitors. Not many. A few old acquaintances. One curious journalist. A clergyman or two. Most reported the same thing: her stillness. Her politeness. One said she made him feel like the criminal, like he'd intruded on something private. There's a phrase from one of her letters that lingers long after you read it. If I did wrong, it was never in hatred. It was always in mercy. Now historians go round in circles over that one. Was it a self-justifying fantasy? A psychological break? Or was it worse, the truth in her own twisted way? Because that's the thing about Martha Needle. You never see her raise her voice, never hear a scream, never find a diary with a bloody confession, just a series of quiet deaths. And a woman who to the end insisted that her hands were clean even as they ladled out spoonfuls of arsenic with care. The respectable Mrs. Needle, the woman who brewed murder by the cupful. You're sitting now in the back row of the courtroom, your shoes echoing faintly on the polished tiles. The gallery is packed, all eyes fixed forward. But your gaze keeps drifting to the woman at the center of it all, Martha Needle. She's seated between two guards, her gloved hands folded delicately in her lap. She's wearing a dark dress, nothing extravagant but clean pressed and proper. Her hair is pinned, not a strand out of place. She looks like she could be attending a luncheon, not standing trial for multiple murders. And that's what makes the room buzz. Not the crime, not the method, but the contrast. How does a woman who looks like a governess end up on trial for killing her husband, her 3 children, her fiancé's father, and nearly his brother, too? That's the question, pulsing through every cough, every whispered breath, every squeaky ink pen in the courtroom. The prosecution lays it out slowly, like tea steeping the evidence, unfurling leaf by poisonous leaf. They speak of symptoms, of timelines, of tea that always came after dinner, and death that always followed the tea. They produce the teacup, carefully, as if it might still kill. They speak of the exhumations. One by one the names are read. Henry Needle, husband. May Mabel and Elsie, daughters. Herman Otto, Otto's father. Louis Otto, Otto's brother, survived barely. Otto George, her fiancé, only spared because he stopped drinking. Each name lands like a drop of ink into water, spreading, blurring. The forensic evidence is clear. The Marsh test, a relatively new advancement in chemistry, is explained to the jury. It detects arsenic even in trace amounts, and it found exactly what they expected. In every stomach, every tissue sample, every soil trace from the burial sites. The courtroom holds its breath. The defense tries a gentler tone. They paint her not as a murderer, but as a victim. A woman weathered by grief, pushed into delusion by unimaginable sorrow. They raise questions of sanity. Did she even know what she was doing? Could she have believed the arsenic was medicine? It's not impossible. Back then, arsenic was in everything. Medicine, cosmetics, tonics. You could buy it without so much as a raised eyebrow. Historians still argue whether Martha knew the exact science, or if she simply knew what it did. But the prosecution has something more powerful than science. They have routine. They show that the poison was delivered not once, but again and again. Repeated doses administered quietly. That takes calculation. That takes intent. And Martha, she watches calmly. She doesn't cry, doesn't react when the names are read, doesn't flinch at the word murder. The judge remarks later that she showed the demeanor of a woman sitting in church, not one facing the gallows. One particularly vivid moment sticks in the public memory. A neighbor takes the stand. An older woman, hands trembling, voice barely above a whisper. She says Martha once offered her tea during a visit, and that she declined not out of suspicion, but because she'd already had some. She laughs nervously. Says, maybe that's why I'm still here. The courtroom doesn't laugh. Here's a curious detail. In a time when photographs weren't always readily available, courtroom artists became minor celebrities. Martha's image was sketched dozens of times during the trial, appearing in newspapers across Australia. In some, she looks like a ghost. In others, like an actress. The public couldn't decide who she really was, and neither could the jury. 12 men, no women allowed. They deliberate for hours, weighed down not just by evidence, but by the impossibility of it all, because this wasn't a crime of rage. There were no wounds, no blood. Just trust poured into cups and sipped away. In their verdict, they choose reason over sympathy. Guilty. The courtroom doesn't explode, it exhales. Martha doesn't protest. She simply bows her head slightly. One observer swears she smiled again, though others claim it was just the light. The judge delivers the sentence, death by hanging. There's no outburst, no final plea. Martha nods, stands, and is escorted away. Not dragged, not pushed, just escorted. She glides out of the courtroom like a woman finishing a piano recital. That's what haunts people most. Not the deaths, not the poison, but the way she did it all, so quietly. You walk with her again this time, not down a cobbled lane or into a parlor with tea and gaslight, but through the long, grey corridor of public memory. Because after the trial, after the sentence, after the newspapers folded, and Otto disappeared into silence, Martha Needle didn't vanish. She multiplied. In sketches, in stories, in whispered retellings. She became the ghost of the Australian imagination. A contradiction with a teacup. Sweet and deadly, ordinary and monstrous. No one could quite decide what to make of her, and so they made her into myths, into metaphors, into someone no longer fully real. The press helped, of course. In the weeks after her hanging, the headlines continued to drip-feed the public new angles. Angel of Death, or Mother in Madness. Did she believe she was saving them, the gentlewoman with the gallows smile? The public devoured it. For some, she became a cautionary tale, proof that you never really know what people are capable of. For others, she became something almost tragic, a symbol of isolation, of domestic despair, of a woman who smiled through hell and made her kitchen table into a crypt. And here's the strange part: over time, people stopped talking about the victims. Henry, May, Mabel, Elsie, Otto's father, Otto's brother, all blurred into the background. The story became hers. Her calm, her trial, her teacup, her execution. Historians still argue whether this is justice or erasure, but either way, it's what happened. She threaded herself into Australia's cultural fabric, not as a monster, but as a mystery. Because unlike some murderers, she didn't give the public what they wanted. No rage, no chaos, no howling madness, just routine, calm, and a recurring pattern of death with sugar. Even the prison staff long after her execution spoke of her with odd softness. She never raised her voice. She was always tidy. She thanked you for everything. You hear those quotes in documentaries and podcasts now, and each time the subtext hums just beneath the surface. How can someone be so kind and do what she did? And yet some crimes are more terrifying because they come wrapped in good manners. Here's your quirky footnote after her execution. A Melbourne playhouse put on a show loosely inspired by her life. It was called The Widow's Cup. Terrible title, decent box office. They changed the ending, of course, turned her into a repentant heroine who sacrificed herself to protect her family from a worse fate. Nothing like the real Martha. But audiences clapped. People love a redemption arc even when history offers none. There were also attempts to pathologize her. Doctors wrote articles, essays with titles like The Female Poisoner, a study in domestic neurosis. They used her as a case study in criminology textbooks. Not because her method was unique, arsenic was old news, but because her demeanor baffled them. One doctor called it affectionate detachment. Another severe dissociation resulting from prolonged trauma. A third just said she had the soul of an undertaker. It all amounts to the same thing. No one understood her. And that might be the most disturbing part, because we want killers to look a certain way. Unhinged, cruel, sloppy. We want them to act guilty, to sweat in court, to scream when sentenced. That's comforting in its way. It means we can spot them. But Martha Needle didn't look like a killer. She looked like your aunt, or your school teacher, or the nice lady who hands out hymn books on Sunday. She walked through grief with tidy gloves and tea towels. She killed in teaspoons, and she smiled as the noose was tied. That's why the story won't die. Because even after she was buried, faceless and nameless in prison ground, the fear remained. What if the person you trust most is just very, very good at pretending? And the teacup, let's not forget, was never just evidence. It was a symbol of comfort turned fatal, of rituals we assume are safe, of something warm and familiar hiding something unspeakable. They never put it on display. Too much scandal, perhaps. Too much discomfort. But it's there behind glass somewhere, labeled, preserved, silent, just like her. And if you lean close enough, you might still catch the faint scent of arsenic and lavender. You're walking through the women's wing of Melbourne jail again, but this time it's different. Empty, quiet, in a deeper, more settled way. The footsteps you hear now belong to tourists decades later, wandering through a museum that once held lives and deaths in its cold embrace. Somewhere in this building, behind a locked case, is the death mask of Martha Needle, chalk-white, serene, and as unreadable in death as she was in life. You stand before it. The plaster has captured everything, the gentle curve of her mouth, the closed lids, the impossibly smooth brow. If you didn't know her story, you might say she looked peaceful, kind. You might think she was a nurse, a nun, a woman who hummed while folding linens. But knowing what you know now, the silence around her face takes on a different tone. This is not peace. This is the mask of restraint, the face of someone who held her secrets so tightly they fossilized into her skin. Visitors pass by. Some read the plaque, some shiver. Others scoff. She doesn't look evil, one says. And you think exactly, because Martha Needle never looked like anything other than ordinary. That was her talent. The prison staff who witnessed her final days wrote about her with almost eerie fondness. One matron described her as gentle and reflective. Another said she kept her cell neat to the end, dusting surfaces with the edge of her sleeve. She thanked the chaplain. She read the Bible. And she stitched a habit she never gave up. She left behind a single piece of embroidery, a white cotton handkerchief hand-stitched with delicate blue thread. The initials MN in a looping cursive. No date, no message. Just thread looped with the same calm precision that marked everything else she touched. It now sits in the museum's archive, rarely shown. Too small, too quiet. But perhaps the most accurate artifact of all, a symbol of care masked in tension and slow unraveling. Now here's a curious twist. Not long after her execution, a woman in Sydney claimed to be Martha's cousin. She wrote a letter to a local newspaper insisting that the real story had never been told, that Martha had been abused, that she was mentally ill, that her crimes were acts of mercy misunderstood by men. The letter sparked mild controversy, but didn't go anywhere. Still, it left a strange ripple in the narrative. Historians still argue whether the letter was genuine or a fabrication meant to humanize her after death. Either way, it added yet another layer to the myth, another shadow in the corners of her already blurry legacy. Let's not forget how rare it was for women to be hanged in Australia. The gallows were largely reserved for men, brawlers, robbers, bushrangers. Women, when convicted, were often spared, given commuted sentences, life in prison. But not Martha. Her execution was firm, unyielding, as if the very neatness of her crimes made them worse. And there's that lingering question, why? Why kill her children? Why poison Otto's family? Why do it with such patience? No confession ever came. Not in court, not in prison, not on the scaffold. She never explained, never unraveled. One prison official claimed Martha told him I did what had to be done, and when he asked why, she smiled and said, "Some things don't belong to the world." That's not an answer, of course, but it's the kind of sentence you end up thinking about long after. And here's the strangest part. There's no real portrait of Martha Needle, no confirmed photo, only courtroom sketches and a death mask. Her face exists mostly in imagination, in the sketches of men who didn't know her, and in the plaster shell made after she stopped breathing. In that absence, we invent her. Was she soft-spoken? Yes. Was she manipulative? Probably. Was she grieving, traumatized, cold, calculating, or deeply unwell? The answer might be all of the above. She doesn't fit into neat categories, which is partly why she still lingers in our minds. Because some people scare us more when we can't define them. When we can't say, "Oh, she was just evil," and move on. Martha Needle forces us to look deeper, into motive, into stillness, into the dangers that hide in the rituals we trust most. A teacup, a spoon, a moment of comfort, turned fatal. So the next time you're in a museum and you see a display labeled Domestic Crimes 19th Century, stop and look closer. There may be a teacup there behind glass, a spoon, a linen handkerchief, and behind them the invisible presence of someone who changed what those objects meant forever. Because Martha Needle didn't just poison people, she poisoned trust. And trust once broken leaves a residue far more lasting than arsenic. You return to the streets now, not the real ones, but the ghost streets. The kind that live in the back of your mind, fogged in time, and lit only by what we remember or choose to. Melbourne has moved on. The cottages have been knocked down, the laneways repaved, the gas lamps replaced with harsh electric light. No more horse carts, no more neighbours bringing casseroles after funerals. But if you close your eyes and listen closely, you can still hear it, the clink of a teacup, the soft tap of a spoon, the whisper of a woman saying, "Drink this. It'll make you feel better." It's the echo of Martha Needle. She's no longer just a person. She's become something else entirely. A figure of folklore, a case study, a bedtime warning dressed in lace. Teachers bring up her name in criminology lectures. Podcasters tell her story in hushed tones. Museums dust off her files every few years and wonder if it's time to bring her story back into the spotlight. It always returns, slowly, quietly, like she did everything else. Even in modern Australia, you'll sometimes find her name slipping out in odd places. "Don't be a Martha," someone jokes when a friend oversalts the soup. A dark chuckle, a thin grin. But it stays with you longer than it should. Because the legend of Martha Needle isn't scary in the traditional sense. There are no knives, no blood-soaked linens, no dark alleys. Her horror lies in repetition, in kindness turned fatal, in the smallness of it all, and in the calm. You see most stories like hers unravel with chaos. A fight, a scream, a frantic letter. But Martha's story unfolds like a napkin being placed gently in your lap. One moment you're sipping tea, the next you're not waking up. Historians still debate how many people she might have killed. The number officially stands at 5, but there are murmurs, neighbours who got sick, cousins who died young, an old housekeeper who just didn't wake up one morning. No evidence, no proof, just patterns. There are always patterns. And here's something peculiar. One of the few surviving objects from Martha's home besides the infamous teacup is a cookbook. Nothing fancy, just a handwritten leather-bound volume of Victorian recipes. Meats, puddings, preserves. But tucked in the back in faint pencil are several notes not about food, but about dosage. Incortiesp arsenic eel severe stomach upset. 1/2 Teacup is unconscious within hours. Moric's death. Delayed. Clean. No signature. No date. But the handwriting matches letters we know are hers. It reads more like lab notes than a recipe book. Today it's kept in a private archive, rarely shown. When it is, it sits behind 2 layers of glass. Not for safety, of course, the poison's long gone, but out of respect. Reverence, almost, for what it represents. Because this wasn't a crime of passion. This was science, schedule, quiet, relentless discipline. And that's why the memory of Martha Needle refuses to fade. It's not just what she did. It's the how. The method, the manner, the complete lack of mess. Even the way she spoke, softly, firmly, always in full sentences, haunts those who recorded her. Prison staff wrote that she made you feel calm in her presence, like a mother or a teacher or a nurse. That's the real horror. You could have sat across from her and felt safe, until your stomach turned, until your hands trembled, until the world went dim around the edges. It's that slow, dawning realization that the person making you tea is the very last person you should have trusted that marks her legacy. And here's a modern curiosity. Every few years, someone proposes a film about her life. A director in Sydney, a production company in the UK. The pitch always sounds the same, a quiet thriller. Historical female-led moody, lighting lots of tea. But the scripts never seem to land. Something about the story resists dramatization. It's too internal, too polite. There's no satisfying climax, no chase, no scream, just that creeping, stomach-turning suspicion. And then silence. Maybe that's why Martha Needle is more unsettling than the most violent killers in history. She doesn't look like death. She offers it with a gentle hand and a sugar cube. And by the time you understand what's happening, you're already halfway gone. You're back in her garden now, or what's left of it. The place where tulips once bloomed in absurd abundance, where neighbors used to compliment the colors and wonder aloud how she managed such vibrant petals in such dry soil. Must be her secret compost, they said. They didn't know. No one ever quite does until it's too late. You crouch near where the gate might have stood, listening to the wind move through the memory of a home. Everything here feels too quiet, as if the ground itself still holds its breath. Martha Needle has been gone over a century, but her presence stretches like tea-stained lace through the folds of time. A story you can't quite fold away. One that refuses to resolve itself. Because for all we've uncovered, the arsenic, the teacup, the bodies, the trial, there's something Martha took with her to the grave, the why. Why kill those who trusted her most? Why destroy the children she claimed to love? Why Otto's father? Why the risk again and again? Historians still argue, of course. They always will. Was she traumatized beyond repair? A child of violence repeating patterns in the only way she knew. Was she calculating and cruel, using death like a mop to clean up the mess of life? Or was she in her own warped way merciful? You won't find the answer in books. Not really. And certainly not in the sanitized museum displays or grainy sketches passed down in archives. Those things preserve the facts, not the feeling. And it's the feeling of Martha Needle that lingers. That quiet unease. That chill of the familiar turned fatal. That terrifying thought that you could sit across from someone for years, drink tea with them, laugh with them, trust them only to realize they were slowly, gently ending you. Not out of hatred, but indifference, or worse, love misdirected and toxic as a leaking gas lamp. The story ends as they all do. The newspapers moved on. New scandals, new crimes, but the public never entirely let go. People remember Martha in fragments, a quote here, a rumor there. They whisper her name like it's bad luck to say it too loudly. Even her burial site remains unmarked, a patch of earth beneath which a woman lies, whose actions still raise questions we don't know how to ask. Because it's easy to understand monsters who roar, less so the ones who smile. You pass a cafe now. It's modern. Clean. People sitting with lattes and laptops. But someone's drinking tea, and for just a moment you glance at the cup a little longer than usual. It's ridiculous, of course, but still, you remember. Martha's not here, but the echo of what she did, that's everywhere. In the quiet corners of trust, in the things we assume are safe, in the rituals we perform without thinking. And that's how her story survives, not in headlines, but in instincts. So the next time someone hands you a cup of tea, you might pause, just for a second. You'll sip, you'll smile, you'll push the thought aside. But a small part of you will always wonder, what's really in this? And now, it's time to let it all go. Let the details soften. Let the courtroom fade. Let Martha's quiet steps recede into history where they belong. You're safe here. Just you, the gentle hum of stillness, and the slow exhale of a story finally finished. The flicker of gaslight becomes a distant memory. The teacup is just porcelain now, empty, harmless, resting on a shelf where it can't hurt anyone. You picture the garden in its best season. No shadow, no whispers, just wind in the tulips and sunlight glinting off the fence posts. You feel your breath slowing, your shoulders sink. There's nothing more to solve tonight. No mysteries that need unspooling. Only the steady rhythm of your heart and the softness of the dark settling around you like a well-worn blanket. You did well making it this far. Not every tale ends with answers. Some stories like Martha's are meant to unsettle just a little, not to scare you, but to remind you of how fragile trust can be, and how powerful the calm can become. So close your eyes. Let go of the teacup. Let the courtroom doors shut gently behind you. Drift back through the quiet corridors of thought where even the most wicked tales lose their sharpness in the gentle fog of sleep. You're here now. You're safe. The story is done. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.